Hello. Sound okay?
Yes, good afternoon, Margaret.
All right, great.
This is Craig Vaughn. We
Hi.
actually we actually did just make the meeting live just 1 minute early before
Okay,
the clock start time.
no worries.
It's our intent to get the meeting going about 5:10.
Got it. I'm just gonna mute and go off camera for a moment.
Okay, no worries. For those in the public that have joined us already, thank you for joining us this afternoon for the 38th and Chicago Re-Envisioned virtual meeting. It's now 5 p.m. It's our intent to start the meeting about 10 minutes after 5 in order to allow people to show up to the virtual meeting room before we start our tonight's meeting. Thank you again. Once again, good afternoon and early evening. Thank you for joining us for the 38th and Chicago Re-Envisioned virtual meeting. It's about 1 minute after 5. We will begin the meeting at about 10 after 5 to allow folks to join us here in the virtual meeting room. Thanks again. Once again, good afternoon and evening. Thank you for joining us for the 38th and Chicago Re-Envisioned virtual meeting. It's about 3 minutes after 5. It's our intent to start this meeting approximately 10 minutes after to allow enough time for folks to join us here in the virtual meeting room. Again, thank you for joining us. Once again, good evening and thank you for joining us. It's about 5 minutes after 5. You are here for the 38th and Chicago Re-Envisioned virtual meeting. It's our intent to start the meeting about 10 minutes after 5, so we're going to give it a few more minutes to allow people to join us here in the virtual meeting room. Thanks again. Once again, good evening and welcome to the 38th and Chicago Re-Envisioned virtual meeting. It's about 7 minutes after 5. We're going to allow a couple more minutes here for a few more folks to join us and join us here in the virtual meeting room, and we'll get started about 5:10. Thank you.
Hello.
Good evening. Good evening, council member. Welcome everyone as well to the 38th and Chicago Re-Envisioned virtual meeting. It's about 9 minutes after 5 here now, and we're going to give it one more minute just to see if there's a couple more folks that are able to join us here, and we'll get started at 5:10 with our tonight's presentation and virtual meeting. Thank you. All righty, thank you, folks. I appreciate it. It is now 5:10. We'd like to begin this evening's 38th in Chicago Re-Envisioned virtual meeting. We're going to open with a little bit of meeting logistics. We're going to have a few opening remarks from members of the City Council and the Public Works Director. We are also going to be providing a presentation this evening from project staff. And then after the presentation time period, we'll be conducting a question and answer session whereby we're looking to hear from community members regarding thoughts, comments, and otherwise, questions, etc. And we'll go through that process for the remainder of the meeting. We welcome your participation and joining us here this evening. Next slide there, Trey. Trey, can you click to the next slide? All righty, perfect. Sorry about that. So we'd like to start with some opening remarks from our council member President Andrea Jenkins, followed by Ward 9 Council Member Jason Chavez, and followed up by Public Works Director Margaret Anderson Kelleher. With that, I'd like to give the floor to Council President Andrea Jenkins.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Andrea Jenkins. I'm the president of the Minneapolis City Council, and I represent Ward 8, where this proposed project is taking place at 38th and Chicago, now known as George Floyd Square. It has been my home, my work, my life for the past 25 years, interacting at this intersection, revitalizing, building relationships, attracting businesses, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that I have been waiting for all of those 25 years is infrastructure improvements to be able to really fully realize the full potential of this intersection that has now been hit with tragedy. The murder of George Floyd, which sparked racial uprisings all over the country and the world, and has made Minneapolis the epicenter of this broad conversation. And so, you know, I want to just affirm that no decisions have been made at this point. This is the very beginnings of a conversation around how do we re-envision this intersection and hopefully create a environment that supports the hopes, the wishes, the dreams, desires of our community. And I look forward to working with all and everyone involved to bring that to fruition. So thank you.
Thank you, Council President Jenkins. Council Member Chavez.
Thank you. Jason Chavez here, council member of the 9th Ward. I represent part of 38th in Chicago and George Floyd Square. I live near the intersection, so I do know the importance of it. I just want to say thank you to the people that have been able to make it to these sessions. And for those of you that have not, you have the commitment of the 9th Ward office to engage and bring community into this process. The murder of George Floyd by our MPD changed this intersection forever. And any decision that we move forward with should be with the input of community. So it should be community-led and community-centered. So just want to make sure that our community stay engaged in this process as we move forward, and to bring in as many neighbors as you can into this process. So want to make sure we center racial equity in this process and appreciate 9th Ward constituents and 8th Ward constituents as well staying engaged. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. Margaret.
Well, good evening, everyone, and I'm glad to be with you. We had a very good open house over the weekend at Phelps Park, where we heard from a lot of people, and this is our next step in that process, allowing for input in a way that folks can be with us at another time of day. I want to first say my hats off to our two planners on this project who are leading this project team, and you're going to be hearing from them very soon. Alexander Cato and Trey Joyner. They have, I believe, put together what will become the basis of the model for future public input at the Minneapolis Public Works Department, because it really does focus both this very important project, which is looking at what happens next at George Floyd Square, 38th and Chicago, as it relates to how people are interacting and moving. But it also has these other goals around making sure that community is centered in the work, and that we are starting with that process, this process that is really getting the early input of people. And I will just say, having been the MnDOT commissioner and having seen a lot of processes over the years, lots of times this is not how it goes. Lots of times what happens is that we bring out pictures and drawings to communities and say, here's what we have, react to it. Here we're asking for your input from the beginning of the process, and then we'll begin to bring forward those ideas and those concepts. And so I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here. There's going to be a lot of engagement going forward, and as a relatively new employee of the city, but a longtime resident of Minneapolis, I am glad to be with you and glad to be going on what I see as a journey to re-envision 38th and Chicago, George Floyd Square. We believe all ideas are important, even the ideas that will be beyond the scope of our Public Works Department, and we know that you will be bringing those as well as community. So thank you so much for being here. We have a number of our colleagues with us here tonight to be listening in, to be hearing, and that includes Mary Altman from Community Planning and Economic Development, our Director of Arts. We also art engagement, and we have a number of other people with us tonight. But I just wholeheartedly want to say thank you so much for being here, and look forward to both the presentation, your questions, and ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you for those comments. And thank you, everyone, for your opening remarks. First, let's touch base before we get into the presentation. Let's go over some logistics regarding how to interact with the virtual tool that we're using here this evening, the Teams. If you're using a web version, in order to provide statements, questions, or provide comments otherwise, if you're using the web version, click the Ask a Question button. It's in the lower right corner of the window to submit a question to the project team at any point during the presentation. You can also check the box to ask your question anonymously if you so choose. Note, though, that those questions will be getting queued up throughout the presentation and then responded to at the conclusion of that presentation. Please refrain from using profanity in your questions or comments, as that may cause us to ask that you restate it, just out of respect for those in attendance this evening. Staff will publish the questions and answers as we respond to them. So note that you may ask a question early on in the process, and yet it won't be published for you to view in the Q&A line item until it is responded to here this evening. You can like a comment or question in the using the featured questions tab as well through that web version. If you happen to be on a mobile device or using a mobile version, you can select the Q&A icon on the upper right side of the screen to view the questions box and input your information just the same, and follow the steps that were stated above in doing so. Also note that if for both the web and mobile versions, if you lose audio, check to ensure that you have not accidentally paused the live meeting using the tool. Next slide. So from here, I think we'd like to kind of get ready to get into the presentation. So the way things are laid out, I'll introduce the project team or the project team members that will be presenting here this evening. They'll give an overview of the project itself, talk through the community engagement process that has begun, as some of our previous comments had stated. We'll go through next steps and kind of give you an overview of where we're going from here as a project team with this project, and then we'll conduct the question and answer session, an opportunity for community conversation throughout the rest of the time. With that being said, let's go through our brief introductions here. We have Alexander Cato, who's with the City of Minneapolis Public Works Department, serving as our project manager. There you go. Hello, Alex. We have Trey Joyner with the City of Minneapolis as well, Public Works Department, who is currently serving as the deputy project manager on this project. Hello, Trey. We have Mary Altman as well with City of Minneapolis Community Planning and Economic Development here with us this evening to help answer any questions or otherwise. And myself, Craig Vaughn with Transportation Collaborative and Consultants, serving as an extension of city staff, helping to moderate and facilitate this evening's virtual meeting. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Alexander to begin tonight's presentation. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks for having me. Just want to verify that my audio is coming in clearly. Craig, can you give me a thumbs up if it's coming in clear? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you well.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. It's really great to be here. We had an in-person event on Saturday and are also offering this virtual option just to provide a few more touch points for folks in the community. And it's just really nice to be here. I'm going to talk through a bunch of slides around just a high-level overview of the project, and then we'll transition to Trey. He'll talk about some other engagement pieces. So we're here today, to initiate the project 38th in Chicago Re-Envisioned. I love this photo here. Craig actually captured it last summer. He was out at George Floyd Square in the early afternoon and captured this photo. And it really represents, one of the reasons why this project is occurring, and that's that this space, this intersection, and the way it's been used since the murder of George Floyd is just fundamentally different than the way that intersection was really designed. And so this process is around how do we re-envision, redesign, and ultimately reconstruct this intersection in a way that functions for community and also acknowledges what happened at that intersection with the murder of George Floyd. And so it's a functionality component, and then also the infrastructure itself. And Council President Jenkins talked about infrastructure in her opening remarks. This infrastructure was built in the 1960s. Both of these streets were slotted for reconstructions in our capital improvement program. With the murder of George Floyd, we reallocated this specific intersection because we knew it needed obviously extremely special attention. And so those two things are really what would bring us here today. Next slide, please. And so we're just going to talk about the project scope. I think it's important to realize that we do have a certain scope with this project, but we also recognize that there are greater needs in the community, and we also do recognize that other parts of the city need to come together. So when we talk about scope, just keep in mind that we're talking about this project, but still recognizing many of the other components at play. And so the first is a conceptual design. So we're starting a community engagement process that formally started on Saturday with the open house. We're starting that process to engage community stakeholders, and that process will last roughly a year. And through that process, we'll be doing we'll be gathering feedback from community members on what they would like this space to be, and then starting to develop design concepts. That work has not started yet. It's starting now, but it's really aimed at how do we redesign this street. It also is a reconstruction of the street. So that means the street, the sidewalks, the curbs, the gutters, the signal system, the utilities underground, all of that will be reconstructed with this project. I'll talk about the limits in a future slide. And with this effort, though, we need to balance the infrastructure needs with the components that are asking for justice, for racial healing, for placemaking, for culture. So it's a really complex combination of the physical infrastructure and all of the social components that we need to the best of our ability to blend through this process. Community stakeholders will get to evaluate a variety of different design options. We'll also be exploring how does transit integrate in this? You know, the D-line was originally slotted to go through this intersection. Those plans have been removed from the construction, and it's been put on detour routing. But the 5 and the 23 did used to go through this intersection, and they're currently not. So this project will really determine if and how transit does come back to this space. Next slide, please. So this is the project area. It may be a little hard to see, but basically the extents are to the west at Park, to the east at 10th, to the north at 37th, and to the south at 39th. So effectively the area that is now known as George Floyd Square are the extents of the project. Like I said, these areas were slated for reconstruction within the 2020 to 2030 timeframe, but because of the events of the murder of George Floyd, we specifically carved out this project for a unique and specific design process. Next slide, please. So this is our conceptual design timeline. We started doing some preliminary engagement earlier this winter, and so now we're entering what we're calling phase 2, but it's really our introduction of the project to community. We'll continue that through the spring, and then in the summer, we'll actually start doing some of the community visiting activities. And that really is where we start talking about some of the existing condition components. How do folks use the street? What would they like it to be? But we wanted to have a really kind of soft introduction, so that way folks were aware of the project. As Director Keller said, usually on roadway projects, we come out with concepts and ask for your input, and we wanted to kind of take several steps back and really just introduce the project to you, let you know that it's happening, give community members a time to just kind of understand that. But this summer we'll be starting to work on existing conditions, and then our goal is that in the actual fall, we'll actually have concepts to share, and then through the winter and spring we'll refine those concepts. This is still our tentative schedule. This is, you know, we always try to propose a schedule at the start of the project, and then once we start doing the engagement work, we start to kind of assess the viability of that timeline. But this is what we're proposing. But we really want to make sure that through this process that we're getting good feedback, that we're moving forward in a way that is in agreement with community stakeholders. But it is always important for us to put forth a potential timeline, and this is what we're proposing. Next slide, please. And so these are the design goals. I'm going to just briefly talk about these, and then after this, I'll transition to Trey, and he'll talk more about the engagement process and goals. But for the design goals, the first one is redesign the street to reflect community needs. I really highlighted that in the picture. You know, the way this intersection has functioned since the murder of George Floyd is just completely different. If you've been out into that space, it's very obvious that that intersection is very different than it was before his murder. And we recognize that street needs to be redesigned in a way that reflects the way it's been used and the way community members want it to be used moving forward. We also want to identify space for community use. There's a lot of, you know, active activity that happens in George Floyd Square. There's really a strong sense of gathering. There's, you know, block parties in the summer. It's a very vibrant space in the nicer weather months. So we want to be able to provide design concepts that allow that idea and those desires to flourish. We also want to explore pedestrian and transit-friendly design options. So we say explore because we want to provide those as options and see, you know, through our summer engagement and as we start to refine those, what do those look like? How do you integrate pedestrians? How do you integrate transit? What level of access do vehicles have in this space? You know, those are things we want to explore through our design options. The fourth one is maintaining access for residents and businesses. I think if you talk to any business owner in the area, any resident in the area, they'll tell you that there's been access challenges. You know, getting in and out of that space has been really challenging over the last couple of years. So we want to make sure that with whatever design we put forth, it provides access for those folks living and working and visiting that space. And also, since this is a reconstruction and we're tearing up the street, it does allow us the ability to implement greening, trees, boulevards, green stormwater infrastructure, things of that nature. If you've been out in this space now, there's been some garden beds put in by community members and things of that nature. Those are semi-permanent, but with the reconstruction, we can actually put in permanent trees and greening and things of that nature. So these are all the design goals we're looking at for this project. And the options will cater to some of these more than to others, and it'll be a really exciting process to work through those with through the engagement process. Next slide, please. And then these are some of our city policies that we use. We use these on any project. You know, I will caveat that I completely recommend that this is a very unique project and a very unique process, and Public Works has never embarked upon anything like it in its history. And so we definitely have a very unique lens that we're applying to this. These are just some of the policies that we use for our roadway projects, such as our Complete Streets policy, which prioritizes our most vulnerable users. Our street design guide just got released in the last few years and really helps define how we want to design streets. There's also the 38th Street Thrive Plan, with which Council President Jenkins was a huge champion of, and we want to integrate into that. Vision Zero aims at reducing our traffic fatalities on our streets. Transportation Action Plan, Climate Action Plan, all of these policies are really grounded in how do we make places safer for people and for the environment. And so these are some of the frameworks that we'll use, but also the engagement that we do is really going to be the additional kind of support to what those designs end up becoming. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to transition to Trey now. He's going to talk about the community engagement pieces.
Thanks, Alexander. So as Alex mentioned, I'll start off with the community engagement, talking about some of the community engagement that we've done thus far through our listening sessions that we started in the late end of last year, and also talk about some of our engagement goals, which are pretty unique goals that we're using for this project to make sure that we are very transparent and we're kind of conducting engagement on this project with intentionality. So to start off, we have 5 engagement goals for this project. And as I mentioned, engagement goals are rather new for reconstruction projects in public works. And we really want to make sure that we're putting community first as we're engaging around our design goals and engaging throughout the process. As Alex mentioned, that will continue throughout this year and next year. So our first engagement goal is supporting racial healing. Really, we thought this was important, that almost like a guiding kind of a policy for as we're conducting engagement. We realized that there's need for bringing people together around this intersection, bringing the neighborhoods together, and we really want to, as we're conducting engagement events, or whether it's just generally engaging with community, that we're creating spaces that don't adversely impact the relationships in the neighborhood. We're really creating spaces that people can kind of come together and freely and safely engage in a conversation about this very important project. Our second engagement goal is honoring BIPOC voices. We know that in the past, typically when Public Works engages with communities, we do online surveys, we do project websites, we do fact sheets, but we realize that some community members don't find those as easily accessible. And so when we want to kind of honor BIPOC voices, we want to make sure that we're reaching those communities, those marginalized communities that we don't typically see engage in our reconstruction projects. So this sometimes can take the form of office hours, it can take the form of door knocking, it can take the form of some of the engagement events we're actually offering or hosting as part of this project, which I'll talk about next. In the next slide. We're also having our engagement goal to develop community partnerships. We realize that we can't do this project without the trust and support of community. And so as we're conducting engagement throughout this process and throughout conceptual design, we want to make sure that we're leveraging our community resources in terms of our neighborhood organizations, our business organizations, and any other organizations kind of in the area to make sure that we're getting the most people out to these public engagement events. Our next one is creating with community, which I think is especially important considering the feedback we heard through our listening sessions, which I'll talk about in a second. But we realized that community wants an active role in shaping the future of George Floyd Square, and then also an active and transparent role in how they're engaging on this project. And our last engagement goal is conduct a process that promotes learning. We realize transportation planning is a pretty niche profession, and the work that we put into technical analysis can be kind of complicated sometimes. We do parking counts, we do travel demand counts, we do bicycle and pedestrian counts, we look at travel patterns, we look at origin and destination trips, and all that kind of is pretty esoteric in how we actually make decisions along the way. And so with this engagement goal, it is a priority for the project team to really meet with community and host learning tables, which I'll talk about in a bit, about how do we actually make decisions along the way. So when we reach a final design or we reach our initial concepts, that community not only understands the result and the trade-offs of those concepts, but the process we took to go along the way. Now I'll just kind of talk about our listening session recap, which was which began in about December of last year and concluded about March of this year. I'll just note that our listening sessions weren't meant to be comprehensive. They were really just our opportunity, or our way, the project team's way of really talking to those people that we know are intrinsically engaged with this project. And so we talked with faith leaders, we talked with policymakers, we talked with stakeholders, we talked with activists in the community, and we just talked to business owners and generally residents. And kind of what we heard back, and what we also, I think, we remained flexible to do, is that we heard from residents and we heard from those business owners about who else we should talk to in this process. So this listening session process was really informed by community on who we talked to, and it really gave us the ability to understand what community's desires were prior to even launching the project. And so some of the most important things I think we heard and that were really reflected in our design, our engagement goals, are some of the project desires you see on the screen here. So we heard support, general support for the project and moving forward and engaging in this process, which I think is a very important and pivotal goal to understand as a project team and one as a city, that we're not creating any undue harm or stress to the community as we're going through this project. Another desire that we heard was community influence, and this is directly reflected in the types of engagement activities we're offering, whether they're focus groups, learning tables, or our co-creation team. Community wants a role in how they decide what options we come out to public with and how we go about engaging with the community at large. And I think this is really important too, because it really highlights some of the takeaways, benefits of prior engagement in and around the area, with specifically with 30th Street Thrive, which was largely a community-driven plan. And we want to make sure that with this process, we're doubling down on the lessons learned from prior planning projects, and then really listening to community and how we're proceeding forward. And then finally, one of the project desires, or the other project desire that we heard, was clear communications. And I think this is not specific to this project, but also just very important to communicate as we're going through conceptual design, is that the city and the project team realizes that we need to be explicit and transparent and communicate with intentionality with community all along the way and all throughout our phases of this Re-Envisioned project. We also heard some very preliminary ideas about intersection design. We heard that community considers the George Floyd Square as a sacred place. There's a lot of gathering and activities and mourning and reflection that happens in that space. And we want to make sure that we take that into consideration as we're proceeding forward with the project. We also heard that people want to rethink vehicle access. There's some initial, from the listening sessions, there's initial thoughts about, whether this could be, the whole space could be a memorial, or just many different ideas, right? And so we really just want to capture those and present those back to community, and even during this open house. And then also preserving public space, which is very much related to kind of rethinking vehicle access. The other needs I want to highlight are the kind of the additional needs that kind of fall outside the scope of the project, but we realize that when we come to community and talk about transportation, that isn't the only component of a healthy neighborhood in a healthy space. And so we wanted to make sure that we reflected those additional needs in our engagement process. We heard community would like support for trauma and healing. As I mentioned there, there's a lot that's happened in this space since the murder of George Floyd in 2020, and so we make sure that we capture and kind of provide support, whether it's through the project or through other city staff, as we engage with the community. Also protecting local businesses. We know that, since 2020, some businesses have had to leave and close down in the intersection due to a number of reasons. We're going to make sure that as we're proceeding for this project, that we're also taking that into account. And also the 24 demands of justice. We realize that there are activists in the space that really feel that these are important components, not only to the project, but important components for the city. And we want to recognize that and also reflect it in our as we further engage. And also just public safety concerns, as we know that there's concerns all across the city at large, and we want to recognize that those concerns are also relevant to this project and this in George Floyd Square. So to talk a little bit more about our engagement activities we're providing through this project. So pretty typical, we have our open houses, which, this is our virtual open house. And then we had our in-person open house on Saturday. We realized that open houses are a great way for community to come together, interact, and kind of exchange thoughts and desires for what the process should look like and how to really provide their input. And so we could continue to offer in-person open houses and virtual open houses, and to make sure we accommodate folks who couldn't attend those in-person open houses. Another really important and component of our engagement framework for this project are learning tables. And this kind of speaks to our last engagement goal about creating a space for learning, is that we know that community wants to, it's important to bring community along in the decisions made, but also how we make those decisions. So we plan to offer a number of learning tables throughout this process and throughout this project as we engage in later phases of the project. Another important component of our engagement framework are focus groups. These are small group discussions that occur every 2 to 3 months with the project team. And the real benefit of focus groups is looking at who we've engaged thus far on the project, whether we haven't captured youth or whether we haven't captured faith leaders or whether we haven't captured activists, and make sure that we target those groups and get their feedback all throughout the process. We realize that the construction project, reconstruction project, and conceptual design offers, instances where the community can engage in the project, and we realize that sometimes that's not, due to schedules and due to other things going on in life, people can't interact with those, and so we want to make sure that we capture those voices and we capture those desires throughout the project timeline. Our next engagement activity is a co-creation team. This is a really important component to what we're proposing for the engagement framework for this project. And this is essentially, finding and really working with community and certain community members to really be very well abreast with how we're making decisions all throughout the project timeline. And so the real benefit of the co-creation team is that we start with a set group of folks, and maybe that expands, maybe it contracts, but we bring them along in the entire process, and really having that next level kind of component, or a next level component to our engagement framework. Next, I'll pass it over to Alexander, and he'll talk about next steps.
Thanks a lot, Trey. Did a great job covering the engagement pieces. So yeah, we're going to talk about next steps. This will only take a few more minutes, and then we'll be able to get into the Q&A. We've been getting a ton of questions coming in, so please keep those coming. Next slide, please. So this is the 12-week look ahead. So we had obviously the open house on Saturday, this event today. There's a survey online that I'll talk about. And we're planning to spend the month of May just analyzing that feedback and also planning for the next steps. Trey talked about the community co-creation team. We want to work through that concept a bit more before we move forward on that, but that's a really critical component to this summer. Planning to start our first focus group in June. Coming back with a set of public meetings like this in the July timeframe to start gathering existing conditions. Also starting some learning tables in July and August. So that's what the 12-week look ahead looks like. The goal for the summer is really just to start talking through the street and getting ideas from folks on what they would like that to look like. Next slide, please. So the contact information, we have our project website. This presentation is recorded. and will be available online, as will this PDF of this presentation. Project email is the best way to get a hold of Trey and I. Our phone numbers are on here as well. Next slide, please. And so there's the best way to stay abreast from the city's channel is subscribing to our Gov delivery. So the link is there. That way, whenever we have future events, we'll communicate those through there. We apologize with the event on Saturday that we had to change locations, and also we mailed postcards within about a half-mile radius of the intersection. That's typically how we do our engagement in terms of who we mail content out to. And so the Gov delivery or the sign up online is the best way. You'll always get those updates instantly when they're sent out, and it's just a really good way to stay abreast of the project. We also have a community survey. It's just introducing the project. It's on the website. The survey really just asks for input on the design goals, the engagement goals, and how you would like to stay involved. So it's really just an extension of today. You're definitely, we want to receive your comments around what do you think about the project? How do you feel about the goals? Are there other goals we should consider? Are there certain goals that you don't really support? We're really just here introducing the project, framing it up, getting your feedback before we start with more of our engagement activities this summer. So this really is just an intro and I would say a primer to the future components. Next slide, please. Okay. So that is the end of the formal presentation. We'll transition into the Q&A piece now, and then we can start talking through some of those questions and comments.
Unmute my mic here. Okie doke. Alrighty, thanks much. So what we're going to do now is, yeah, you might want to pause on maybe the Q&A slide there, Trey, if you go back to that one, just as a reminder for folks how to interact. We're getting, as Alexander pointed out, we've received a lot of questions, comments, and otherwise. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through those. I will dole those out to Alexander, Trey, and the team. And then if you'd like to rely on others that are here this afternoon as well with us to maybe chime in, or feel free to chime in. I've identified who it's mostly going to here. Also keep in mind too, on the public side, that I'll be reading these comments or questions for the most part as they are written and provided to me. With that, Alex, I'm gonna go ahead and get started, okay?
Please.
All righty. Let's go with the first one here. So does Public Works intend to replace the streets and sidewalks in George Floyd Square this year? If so, how are they coordinating with George Floyd Global Memorial and the caretakers to ensure that the memorials are not disturbed and that guests can safely grieve and reflect? In other words, what is happening? What is going to happen short term, and how will you keep the square a sacred space? So I know there's 3 questions in there. If you need me to repeat those, Alexander, let me know, but I think you can tackle that one.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Craig. And it's basically, you know, what's happening this summer. So the city is continuing to refine the interim design, which is out there right now, in terms of facilitating access for the public, emergency vehicles, and transit. But there's no definitive timeline for the return of transit to the space, and there's no immediate changes planned for the intersection for this summer. So I would say for now, things are going to operate in the way that they are out there now. Public Works will continue to refine issues as they come up, and we encourage folks that have concerns to report those to the city. But for now and for this intersection, there's no immediate plans for the summer. The work that Trey and I are doing is more associated to the long-term vision for the space, and so we're going to be working to get community input on how the space, you know, could be redesigned in the future. But in the immediate and the short term, there are no immediate plans for the intersection.
Thank you for that, Alexander. I believe that answers the question. I'll proceed to the next. The next person asking this question states, Will there be a Cup Foods in George Floyd Square in the future, considering that I don't believe that franchise should be allowed there after the controversy surrounding it and so-called counterfeit money by St. Floyd? Alexander, do you or maybe CPAD want to comment on that one?
I could provide a brief comment. Mary's on more from a public art standpoint.
Oh, thank you.
And so, yeah, the concerns about CPAD and them operating and you know, just the business concerns with them are best handled by CPAD. So the project 30th in Chicago Re-Envisioned does not directly impact adjacent land parcels. So we're not doing anything in terms of redeveloping land parcels of that nature. And so if there's concerns with the business and the way they're operating, that's better handled through business licensing and through CPAD, which handles that. So just reiterating that, yeah.
Thank you. I think I'll proceed to the next. Alrighty, this one is regarding the public engagement component, Trey. This person writes, I was not aware of the Saturday meeting until after the fact via CARE 11. From what I've heard from others in the neighborhood, the Saturday community meeting had limited communication and the location was changed last minute. What is the plan for ongoing presentations like this? And what other channels that will be used to make sure community members know about these meetings? Trey, do you want to tackle that one from a public engagement standpoint? Given your comments on the presentation.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for the question. It's a great question. I think I want to start off here and say that, you know, when Public Works does engagement and we send out mailers and we send out a Gov delivery and we send out, you know, other communication material, we know we're not going to reach everybody, but we try the best we can to reach as much of the community that we can that is, you know, interested in the project. Prior to the open house, we did door knocking on blocks adjacent to 38th and Chicago, and so we're planning to continue to do that as we move forward in the future. Speaking to the change of venue, the original venue that we had only had a 50-person capacity. We realized with the level of interest in this project, we wanted to seek a larger venue so more people can engage with the project team. And so that's why we pivoted to Phelps Park. I apologize if that was a little bit earlier, but I think, you know, the end result, we were able to really have more fruitful conversations and more wider conversations in a kind of a safer and a larger environment.
And just one thing to add, just encouraging folks to subscribe to the Gov delivery, because that's the most effective way for us to immediately communicate to folks. Mailings take quite a bit of time. We can't mail postcards to everyone in the city just from a budget standpoint. And so Gov delivery is just the most effective way for us to communicate changes. So just putting in a plug for folks on this call to please subscribe to that. And we could put it in the chat as well for folks to see. I think we can.
Yeah, just a reminder there, Alexander, that the Gov delivery is a reference to signing up for email correspondence or communications from the project team, which can be done through the project website for the 38th and Chicago Re-Envisioned. If that's even just a simple Google search, will bring you to the project page whereby you can sign up for that email notification of all things related to this project. I'll go on to the next comment or question, Alexander. All righty, this individual writes, will the memorial remain in its current state or will it be replaced by a more permanent fixture?
So there's no plans to remove the existing artwork that is out there. You know, there's obviously a lot of artwork out there and the plan is for that to stay. I'll defer to Mary. Mary, are you okay just kind of talking about just art in general? Because I know we've been getting a lot of questions about that.
Thanks, Alexander. There's a lot of different ways that art might occur as part of this project. As everyone knows, we have existing art out there. And so part of what we're listening to during this public engagement process is what do folks want to see happen with those artworks. Also, people may propose new artworks, community members or artists may propose new artworks to be out there after the reconstruction. And we do have a process for considering those that involves the Minneapolis Arts Commission as well as folks in Public Works. And then it is probably it's likely that the city will commission artwork as part of this reconstruction process too. So we're listening to folks again right now about what they'd like to see out there and how we can support those interests as the project is constructed and artists get engaged.
Thanks, Mary. I'll go to the next comment or question. This one's, let's see here. Okay, the person writes, will the Minneapolis water treatment plant, be involved in the construction of George Floyd Square in relation to the recent controversy surrounding the tap water's slight white tint in recent media articles?
I'll just state that the issue with the water plant is separate from the 30th and Chicago Re-Envisioned project. It's a completely separate effort, and I can't provide any additional comments on the status of that effort.
Alrighty. Here's another one. Will there be a mosque? As a member of the Islamic community, I would like to pray there.
Thank you for the question. There are a few religious spaces in the area. I know Calvary Lutheran Church is there, Worldwide Outreach is there, and I believe Cup Foods has a mosque in the basement of their facility. But those are at the discretion of those groups in terms of the religious offerings they provide. This project is not impacting land use parcels. And so, this effort will not be directly impacting religious institutions.
I think that comment and question or way you answered that, Alexander, will address the next one as well. I'll read it aloud though, so it makes sure to get logged. Also, could you please add a synagogue to George Floyd Square? Us Jews are greatly inspired by George Floyd and his heroic death, and we wish to venerate him in our place of worship as well. I think your previous answer maybe addresses that as well, but if you'd like to contribute some more.
I'll just say, with the goals that we talked about in allowing racial healing, and I realize that's a little different, it could be, interpreted differently, but I think, with the art components, I think it will integrate a lot of healing, and the way folks of different backgrounds feel, I think will likely, be a part of that. I can't comment on what route that will take and how that art could play out on this project. But I think it's still an opportunity to explore. It's just we can't really at this point in time say definitively what that will be.
Understood. Next one here. It's pretty clear that George Floyd's Square community wants the intersection closed. When can we expect that demand to be met?
So, and I'm just pulling this from the FAQ, but the City of Minneapolis' perspective is that the city has within its power met the 24 demands of justice that are within its legal authority to meet, and other demands that are outside of the city's legal authority, the city will support and advocate for, but cannot directly solve those challenges.
And Craig, I'll just jump in here and note too that, through this reconstruction project or re-envision project, we're looking to do very comprehensive engagement around this project. And so we're looking to incorporate a number of community feedback, whether that's from the activists, residents, stakeholders, business owners, a number of folks within the space and who are affected by or impacted by this construction, as well as transit users and users of the intersection in general too. So as we incorporate all that feedback through our conceptual design process, we'll let that process dictate, what happens and what concepts we bring out and get that community feedback from.
Thanks, Trey. Okay. Here's another one for you. What would you rate the air quality at George Floyd Square? I would love to visit, but I fear that my lungs will be unable to handle its air. This is an environmental review question type. Alexander, Trey, do you want to take that one? I know either one of you might be able to respond here.
Yeah, I'm not directly aware of the air quality issue. I know there's been concerns around the lack of, greening and just climate equity issues in the area. And I would say to the best of our ability with the design goals, we do want to incorporate greening, which does have some climate improvement benefits. But in terms of, immediate concerns about air quality and visiting the square, I'm not directly aware of those and how those would prohibit someone from visiting the square in any way different than other areas of the city of Minneapolis.
Okay, thanks, Alexander. Make sure I get myself oriented here. All right, this is a good question related back to just a clarification and some additional information for folks. Trey, I'm going to pass this one to you first. Who are community stakeholders? How does one become a stakeholder? How do stakeholders give input? Trey, do you want to start off on that one?
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Great question, and thanks for the question. Stakeholders are really broadly defined as we, engage in this project. It's really, folks that, immediately are adjacent to the corridor, as well as people who live in and around the space. We realize that, the intention on this project and this intersection is very broad, and it kind of goes outside of the boundaries of what is colloquially called George Floyd Square. And so we want to make sure that, from a process standpoint, that we allow for, everyone who's interested in engaging in this project, particularly, Minneapolis residents and people who travel through the area, the ability to engage in the project. So we don't specifically define what stakeholders are. We just create a process to where people can engage in various different forms. And that's kind of speaking to the different types of engagement activities we're offering for this project, whether it's focus groups, learning tables, our co-creation team, our open houses, our emails, and not just a number of other engagement activities. So we really want to create an open process.
Thanks, Trey. Here's another one related to process for you. Maybe stay on the mic there. What will be the process for informing wards 8 and 9 and city residents of input opportunities? My 10th Avenue friend received a flyer, or I would not have known about this event tonight. Thanks in advance for your thoughtful approach and your info about communication process.
Thanks for the question, Craig, and thanks for the question. Typically when the city does a reconstruction project, or whether we're doing a resurfacing project, the typical process is to send out postcards a block off the corridor. For this, as Alex mentioned, we decided to expand that boundaries to a half mile because we know that there's a lot of interest in this project, and so we sent those postcards out to a half mile around the area. But I'll just state that as we continue throughout engaging with this project, we want to remain flexible and listen to community, and if there are opportunities to further engage and further notify community and stakeholders about upcoming engagement events, we'll do so. As Alex mentioned, we have our government delivery. I really encourage you all to sign up for that. We have the project website, and as also we have just Alex and myself, we have our numbers that you can call, which are listed on the project website, to learn about any additional engagement events. And I'll just state plainly that we know that we're not capture everybody, but we're going to do our best to really create a very open process.
Alexander, anything to add there? Sorry, I just saw you lean in. Okay, thank you. Okay. The next one is more a statement. I'll just read this. Not sure there's any response necessary here. This individual writes, I believe we could sell Black Lives Matter products to support the project and budget for the reconstruction of George Floyd Square in George Floyd's honor. Here's the next one. This is a question, and it relates back to presentation materials. Alexander, why is justice not included in design goals?
That's a good question. And, I would say these are draft goals, and I thought I was freezing. These are draft goals, right? So we created these after some of the preliminary engagement and just spending, Trey and I have been spending, quite a bit of time since George Floyd's murder involved in some of the planning for this work. And so the goals are still subject to change. We're using this as the opportunity to get more feedback. So I think justice could very well be part of the engagement goals, and could even help correlate with some of the requests that, the caretakers have asked around keeping the street closed what does justice look like, Resolution 001, and even just the concept of transportation justice and how do you use infrastructure to help meet the needs of the community. So to be short, I think justice could become one of the engagement goals if there's enough support for that. We're still in a preliminary phase with the project.
Thanks much. Next comment here. It's question and comment. Are you planning to only hold events in the nice months? Because we have events every month and every week. So please don't destroy our community we have built.
Yeah. So this process that we were laid out is starting this spring and will go until next spring. So that'll be going into the winter as well. We were trying to do the open house a little earlier, but we were just afraid it was going to be too cold and we didn't want to impact attendance. And so now with the nice months, we definitely want to get out and engage, but we'll be doing stuff, throughout the year, indoors and outdoors. I think it'd be really nice to do some events in the actual square. We wanted to actually do the open house on Saturday in the square, but as Trey alluded to, the venue we had capacity wise wouldn't work for the demand. But so to answer your question, we'll be doing events all year long, warm and cold when the winter comes, and just are really excited to have a variety of events, especially this summer, to get just to reach out to folks, because there's still a lot of people that don't know about the project or may not be fully aware of the ins and outs of it. So we'll be doing a lot of different things to reach out to people.
Thanks, Alexander. So I believe you answered this a little bit earlier, Alexander, or at least commented on it through one of your answers. I'm going to read this one again and see if it sparks you to answer any differently or just repeat that one. I apologize. What is the city doing to address the 24 demands in the justice resolution?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know it's been a really, it's been a big thing. We've heard that a lot in our engagement and in the conversations that we've had. And, I haven't been specifically involved in those conversations. So it's, like I said, I'm not directly involved in those conversations, so I can't really speak to great detail around that. The perspective overall from the city is that they have met the demands that are within their legal authority to meet, and that the city supports and will advocate for those other demands that are outside of its legal authority.
Thank you. This one, Trey, you might want to lean in on this one here. This is relevant to community engagement and measuring that engagement. Why isn't there a metric number for community engagement, such as engaging X% of people within X miles regarding process here?
Yeah, it's a great question. So thanks for asking it. I think, really what we want to do with this process is make sure that we maintain, establish, and nurture those community relationships. We're not going to put an exact number on what that looks like, because I think that's rather counterproductive to really to having those fruitful conversations. And so, whether it's a large number, it's a small number, I think the real goal is that we've really done our best to proceed forth intentionality and transparency on this project. And when we, dip into our design concepts and kind of reach final design, which is, planned for next year around 2023, that a lot of those designs and the process that we took along the way has a lot of community buy-in.
Thanks for that, Trey. Excuse me. The next comment here, I'll read as the individual wrote. It's more of a comment and a rhetorical question. Replacing the asphalt at George Floyd Square seems the same sort of sacrilege as changing Martin Luther King's bed sheets at the Lorraine Motel. Wouldn't you agree?
I could comment on that just because, as I've thought about this project and what a reconstruction is, and you're literally ripping up the pavement. And when you even think of, racism, and I interviewed someone and they said this, and it's always stuck with me, is, racism seeks to erase history. And I totally get it, right? How do we reconstruct this street without erasing the memory of George Floyd and what happened? How do we honor that? And then how do we actually physically do that? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what it looks like when that time comes and how we do that. I think that's definitely a deeper conversation that needs to happen with community stakeholders, so it's done in a respectful way, or maybe parts of the street are not reconstructed. I don't know, but I'm aware of the sensitivity of that. The project team is aware of the sensitivity of that. And I just think it's something that will require further conversations around, and will also require just a further understanding of what a memorials looks like in that space and how we preserve and protect instead of erasing that memory.
Thanks, Alexander. Next one. This one had some lengthy ads to it, so we're going to shorten it down a little bit here. But the point being is the Bryant Neighborhood Organization, this is how it's written, the Bryant Neighborhood Organization passed the following vision for George Floyd Square. I believe this supports all of the design goals and values that have been described. I strongly urge this group to consider it as a charrette for possible designs of this corner or of that corner. Next one. Here's a question for you. Who is the decision maker when there's a difference between what the community wants and what other stakeholders want?
Can you repeat that one more time, Craig? It's a really good question. I'm just trying to process that.
No, yeah, I
don't mean to laugh in any disrespectful way. I'm just processing.
No, understood. No, understood. I'll reread it for you. Who is the decision maker when there is a difference between what the community wants and what other stakeholders want?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in this situation, Minneapolis City Council and ultimately the mayor are the ultimate decision makers. The community co-creation team that Trey talked about is designed to allow a group of community stakeholders to be able to provide a recommendation to the project team, and the project team to carry forth that recommendation to City Council and to the mayor. And so that's the structure that we are proposing for this project. Our hope through this work is that the recommendation that's reached is done in tandem with community. I think we understand the risk, the sensitivity of not satisfying that community desire, and this project is really designed with the intention to best lend that voice from the community into the design, to the City Council, to the mayor. But yes, the mayor and City Council are the ultimate decision makers.
Craig, I'll just jump in here too, and just a note in addition to what Alex is saying about the depth of community engagement on this project is that Public Works Transportation Planning and Programming, our division, really uses our city policy, which Alex talked about earlier, whether it's our transportation action plan or our street design guide or our Vision Zero action plan to balance and really inform how we're making decisions on this project and how we bring community along in the process. So in addition to making decisions, the city does have a framework and a policy about how we'll be informing how we come up with design iterations on this project. And so again, it will be a process that ultimately, as Alex mentioned, will reach City Council and the mayor for approval.
Thanks for that, Trey. The next item. I can't imagine that bulldozing the garden beds, Center Memorial, excuse me, and other structures the community has made will feel like community is first. Will there be a plan to preserve and keep any elements of George Floyd Square's current structures? I don't know if Alexander, you want to tackle this one. You addressed it a little bit earlier in some of your comments.
Yeah, I'll actually defer to Mary just because she's been doing a lot of the public art, because we consider a lot of those pieces public art. So, I'll just quickly add that Public Works and the city has been doing their best to maintain and preserve some of those while still providing, a general level of access to folks in that area. So our intention is always to preserve art, and we don't have any plans for removing any of that art this summer. Mary, anything else to add around just art preservation? I know it's always a really, sensitive topic with folks.
Well, first, I'd just like to say that the people at the square, led by Janelle Austin, are doing a fabulous job of collecting the artworks and other objects there and preserving them off-site. And they've been doing, active conservation for nearly 2 years. And I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of objects they have collected and conserved, but they're really a national model for the work that they've been doing. And the people in this community are really fortunate to have them doing that groundbreaking work. Oh, I just crashed, I think. Can you hear me, Alexander?
Yeah, you're good, man.
So I think as this project proceeds, I think the city will be wanting to hear from the community about any role the city could play in supporting the conservation. But as I said, the keepers are doing such a good job that we don't need to step in and take a role if that's not needed.
Thanks, Mary. All right, here's another comment or question, and this is about targeted engagement. Trey, I might send this one to you. Considering your stated mission of specifically catering to the most vulnerable parts of the local community, do you have any intentions to be specifically inclusive towards Black trans folks?
Thanks for the question, Craig. It's a great question. So, we realize that there are communities and groups of folks that, are important to be incorporated into this project, primarily because we want to conduct a design and engagement process that's reflective of the neighborhood's demographics, and so we don't want to, as we're engaging in this project and laying out types of activities, we see that, a certain demographic is overrepresented and is not reflective of the neighborhood demographics. We want to make sure that we're intentional about capturing those audiences. And so as I mentioned, we have focus groups that are a component of this project where we can kind of, look at, what demographics are excluded and specifically focus on them. So, whether it's the Black trans community or whether it's another community that, hasn't been represented in our engagement process, we want to make sure that we target those audiences.
Thanks, Trey. Response. Next question. How many individuals attended the meeting on Saturday?
So we had roughly 150 people. And looking at the list for tonight, there's about 80 folks in attendance tonight. And we've also gotten, Trey, how many survey responses have we gotten so far?
We have about 300.
We have pretty good attendance overall. Definitely would love to have more attendance from folks. So please spread the news, share with a friend, encourage them to sign up to the Gov delivery or to attend events. But those are the existing numbers we have for our engagement activities so far.
Thanks for that, fellas. How much space near George Floyd Square is public land? Does the city own any lots nearby other than the park space? Alexander?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think through that. I think
the flood pond.
Mary, do you want to clarify a little more what you mean by the flood pond, just for folks that may not know?
No, I was just so the city owns a flood pond area that is between Chicago and Park, near 37th, and that is managed by the city's water department, Public Works.
And a lot of folks in the community know it as Say Their Name Cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other area would be Phelps Park, but that's owned by the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. That's about a block south. That's where we hosted our open house this past Saturday.
That's correct.
Yeah. So there's not a lot of city maintains the street, obviously, but there's not a lot of, I would say public land. I know there's been a lot of, we received a lot of questions as to, what's the status of the Speedway gas station? Will the city purchase that? Could it be developed into some type of museum or et cetera? And the Speedway site is owned by a separate party, and they're separate than the operator of the former gas station. The city did engage with that property owner last year and is currently reconnecting with them. with the intention to evaluate options to possibly purchase the site, but no decisions have been made on that. But so the city is starting to explore that. The Community Planning and Economic Development Group is leading that work, but it's still in a very preliminary and early phase. But we do know that there's obviously a strong desire from community to have more kind of space in that area, and I know the Speedway has been a popular space that's been used quite a bit over the last couple of years, and I think there's a lot of community desire for that to transition into something. So it's being investigated, but nothing definitive has been confirmed yet.
Thanks, Alexander. Others? Next one. I apologize. Next one. How does the amount of businesses that have closed in George Floyd Square compare to the average throughout the city during the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We don't have that information. Just, me and Trey are in the Transportation Planning and Programming Group, so we don't work in the division that analyzes that data. So we can't really provide much specific data around that. And I know the pandemic has really exacerbated a lot of businesses, and there's been a lot of business closings around the city, especially on Lake Street and especially at 30th in Chicago. But I don't have any specific data to provide on the numbers in relation to George Floyd Square.
And I'll just note too, we can work with our Community Planning and Economic Development Department to investigate that, and should numbers be available, we can definitely share it.
But I would say from the engagement we've done before, we've engaged with the business owners in the community, and we know that's a really, strong concern is protecting local businesses, helping them to thrive and prosper. And so, with our engagement, we will have some business focused engagement to provide an opportunity for folks that conduct commerce in that area to have their voice heard as well. Because we want this, with this redesign, we want this space to function for a variety of users, residents, businesses, visitors, etc. And so we do understand the importance of having a space that works for those businesses.
Alrighty, thanks for that. The next few are a lot of process questions related to public involvement. I think this will be good to kind of share information out regarding this. Trey and Alexander, I'm going to start going through these. Are the learning tables for the community to learn from the project team, or for the project team to learn from the community?
Good question. I'd say it's both. We were not able to get James Trice to join today, but James Trice from Public Policy Project, and also NAO Partners and Dietrich Powers have been helping us out with a lot of the engagement. So we're working really deeply with them. They were at our Saturday event. But the learning table concept is really to help folks in the community understand the complexities that go into a project like this. So, how does green infrastructure play out? What does a sidewalk or a pedestrian-friendly environment look like? How do you still maintain some level of access for emergency vehicles? And so it's designed to help kind of distill some of that information, but also we can explore topics that are different too. What does transportation justice look like? How do we have a prospering economic development center in this area? It's kind of where we have the ability to bring in a lot of different topics and lead discussions in a roundtable environment. And that's the goal of Learning Tables. So I think it's helping the community or community stakeholders understand some of the nuances in a way that's a more kind of friendly, educational, informative, but also getting feedback from the community stakeholders on what's really important to them. What do they desire? What do they feel? How do they feel about this project? Are there other needs they have? We understand the scope of our project is this, right? But community needs are this. And how do we help kind of coalesce some of those things and bring in other resources too? So I'd say the learning tables are both to help the project team learn and educate, but also to help community learn and educate as well.
All right, thanks for that, Alexander. Here's a question too regarding listening sessions, which I think would be good to come back and here's some response on this. So wondering if the Baha'i community within the center, with the center at 37th and Chicago, has been involved in these listening sessions yet. Trey and or Alexander, you want to dive in a little bit on the listening session process and specifically
Alex can take this one. Yeah, I'll let Alex take this one.
Yeah. So we interviewed a variety of stakeholders in the area, some residents, some faith leaders, some business leaders, some community organization leaders. We conducted about 30. We only had, a small time frame to conduct those sessions, so we could not interview everybody. And we really used that work to tee this work up. And Trey highlighted what we learned from those sessions. And I would say some of the biggest things we learned was that from the folks we engaged with, there was general support for this project and a desire for this project to move forward. But this project should be clear and transparent in terms of what it's doing with its communication, and also allow community members to have a strong level of influence. And that's why we're recommending the engagement approaches that we are recommending. And that's why we're providing the opportunities throughout the summer to enhance that. And so I would say if you want to be engaged, engage with us now, engage with us in the events that are happening in the spring and the summer. Speak your truths at those points, because no decisions have been made except that we're starting this project in process, right? But what that really looks like and what shape that takes is really dependent on those that we engage and involve with. And so I would, for folks that are curious, come to one of the events we're doing this summer, respond to the survey, give us your feedback on the design goals, the engagement goals. And when we start getting into existing conditions design and start talking about the street and start working through concepts, share your input at those stages, because that's kind of, I think, the best point to really get involved right now.
Oops, undo my mute. Thanks, Alexander. Here's a comment followed by a question then. Public Works should accommodate the community and come to our community meetings. We hold them twice daily, 8 a.m. and 7 p.m. Has either of these presenters attended a single meeting?
Yeah, I mean, Trey and I have been to a variety of those meetings. We haven't been there recently, but I would say especially, after George Floyd was first murdered, Trey and I were at those meetings quite a bit. And, are totally fine coming to those meetings. We'd encourage you all to extend an invite. And either of us is happy to come and kind of talk about the project and get your feedback and your opinions as well. Trey and I are talking about how do we become more involved, considering having office hours and things of that nature as well throughout the summer. We just haven't finalized that yet. But yeah, I'm totally fine coming to a meeting at the Speedway gas station. Maybe not the early one. I don't know. I forget what time y'all do it at, but I'm fine with that.
Okay. Alrighty. So here's a couple questions regarding the co-creation team and process, Alexander or Trey. So how is the co-creation team selected? Are these meetings open to the public?
Yeah. So any city meeting is open to the public. The selection process for the co-creation team, we have not finalized that yet. We're still working through that.
And then a follow-up to that would be is how do you see participation by the neighborhood organizations in the community co-creation team?
Well, I see that as very critical. I mean, Powderhorn Park Neighborhood Association, Can Do, Bancroft, and Bryan Neighborhood Organization are really critical, and all are kind of those four corner neighborhood organizations that have a large level of influence in this project. So I see their involvement is absolutely essential.
Thanks for that. Another process question related to engagement. So how are focus groups selected or determined?
Yeah, so yeah, please try.
Yeah, I think it's important to realize, given the people that we've seen engage on the project thus far, and as we continue through the latter phases of this project, is that really taking a critical look at who has engaged in this project thus far, and using focus groups as an opportunity to target those populations that we haven't seen show up in prevalence on the project. And as I mentioned, we really want to conduct a process that that's reflective of the demographics of the neighborhood that we're engaging in, and largely the city's demographics. We don't want to see any demographics overrepresented through the process, because that's a clear indication that we are, we have something to learn and something to do more to engage those wider communities. So as far as how focus groups are selected, it's a learning process, and for us to be very intentional about who we're talking to and engaging on the project.
Thanks for that, Trey. Let me just make a note here. It is approximately 6:30 p.m. This meeting is scheduled to go till about 7 p.m. About 30 minutes remaining. I believe we have roughly 70 comments or so left to go through. For those comments that may not be read aloud here toward the end, this meeting is being recorded, and all comments are transcribed and taken down as notes, and will be available as part of a meeting summary from this meeting as well. I'll continue on and try and pick up my pace some too. If there's any, I can kind of just read off too to make sure folks hear them here as we're talking. I saw in CARE 11 that the memorial will be done separately at a later date than the re-envisioning work. If community is first, the memorial should be a priority. How will this be kept as a priority during this planning process?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a great question. The way Trey and I have always looked at this work is that, we're coming in as transportation planners to help delineate space within the right of way, just from a functionality standpoint, because there's a lot of, different needs in this space. How do people get to this space? How do they get out of this space? How do they visit this space? Where could a memorial be? So Trey and I look at this more kind of and the project team more from a spatial standpoint. How do we help delineate space? And then, so our work is really critical because, we're stewards essentially of the public right of way of that delineation of space. And this project is really about organizing the functionality of that space. And then I view the memorial effort kind of coming in as the delineation of space starts to, solidify a little more. And then the planning around the memorial can kind of take shape from there. The memorial process is still not defined. There's not a specific project around that. But I think we all know the reality that this project won't be successful, nor will it ever be implemented without having more concrete plans in place around the memorial. And I think the other reality is this work is, the reason this work got created is because it's the infrastructure and the way infrastructure is funded is a part of our capital improvements program. And so we have budgets allocated for that. We have a lot of processes in place. And so this work, just from a process standpoint, was easy to get going in terms of the way the city enterprise operates. And it's kind of serving as kind of that first step forward, and will help bring along some of those other efforts that need to happen, around the memorial, around what do we do with some of this adjacent land. And so I would say we ask for a little patience and trust, and also this process allows community members to elevate the concerns around the memorial. As we start doing this work, we know and can respond and hear that feedback and bring that back and help adjust the project as it moves forward. So I think if there's things in this project that you are seeing that you're concerned about that are not coming forth yet, give us that information so we can take that back and recraft and retool.
And I'll note too that, through this project and with the scope of this project to, address the asset related conditions and how the space has been used over the course of 2 years, that the city has a lot of great policy guidance on how to design safe streets, how to design pedestrian accessible streets, how to design transit accessible streets. But when it comes to a memorial, that's a more amorphous and somewhat ambiguous process that we're really going to be looking to, community and this future but parallel memorial process to define what that looks like. We don't want to be presumptuous and say, this is what, we're using as a policy guidance to design a memorial, because, that doesn't necessarily exist in the city's policy guidance.
Thanks, Trey and Alexander. So this question here or comment relates back to maybe some previous responses from the project team members. So I'm wondering, this person writes, I'm wondering about some of the additional concerns that were referenced in previous comments related to businesses, community healing, public safety, etc. If those aren't directly addressed in this initiative, where is change making happening in this realm? Is that outside of the city entity?
That was a lot of content. Craig, can you repeat that one more time? I'm just trying to.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so this is related to, you know, as we state, as you've stated in some of your responses to, just wondering about the additional concerns that were referenced in your responses. I'm paraphrasing here now, related to businesses, community healing, public safety, etc. If those aren't directly addressed as part of this initiative or project, where is the change making happening within those spaces, within those elements? Is that outside of the city entity? And I paraphrase the statement.
I would say it's definitely within the city and city enterprise's responsibility to provide those concerns. When you think about public safety, that's the Minneapolis Police Department and also the Office of Violence Prevention. When you think about business, that's community planning and economic development. When you think about community healing, that almost comes under the health department in some ways. And I'm not trying to push those responsibilities to them, but there are other parts of the city enterprise that are better equipped for some of these issues, or not maybe issues, but opportunities and challenges. And like I was saying in my last statement, this project is kind of the first formal thing out in this space since the murder of George Floyd. And this project can also help bring in some of those other needs, desires, and components from other departments in the city enterprise. And so I feel that it does put, you know, quite a bit on this project, but it also allows us the ability to help pass on that momentum to other groups to help bring in those resources. And so I think this project can help facilitate the momentum that needs to occur within some of those other areas.
Thanks, Alexander. Good response. Next one here is related to the engagement process. I think they just are looking for a clarification in our in a response someone may have mentioned. So clarify, by faith leaders, do you mean leadership affiliated with Worldwide Outreach for Christ, Calvary Lutheran, or the Baha'i Center?
Yes, those are our faith leaders in the area.
Amongst others. Yep.
Amongst others, yeah.
Yep. Thank you. Yep. I deeply appreciate the approach of public input prior to creating design. As a long-term block leader, I know we will appreciate having opportunities for learning and input for broader neighborhood. Comment. Thank you. Next one, a comment was, I wish this had been the approach Fry took in 2021. Thanks y'all for doing this work in a good way. Comment. Here's a question related to art. Are you going to put a statue of George Floyd on the site? Mary, do you want to chime in on that one? I think regarding art process.
Can you repeat that, Craig?
Yeah, no worries. It says just a question that states, are you going to put a statue of George Floyd on the site?
Well, as I stated earlier, I think that there are many ways that art could happen on the site, and some of the projects might be initiated by the city and as part of this project. Some of the projects could also be initiated by the community. So, and I don't have a crystal ball about the kind of art projects that will be developed. The city's approach to developing public art is to really integrate the art into what's getting built and to support the identity of the site. And it's extremely rare that we do that through a statue. I know that some people, in terms of a vision for a memorial, may anticipate that a statue could be part of a memorial. And so I don't think we should say that a statue won't happen. You know, as both the memorial and the art get planned, we're going to listen to the community, and the city will bring on artists to help, an artist or artists to help build the vision for the public art at the site.
Thanks, Mary. Let me just get my bearings here on the list. Here I am. Okay, so this one is I'm just going to read it as I kind of see it here, Alex and others. To what extent will the square be policed, and how much of the space will this holy square be? Will all residents be welcomed to the same standards?
Can you just repeat that one more time? I think I got most of it, but I'm just trying to process it a little more.
Yeah, no worries, I will. To what extent will the square be policed, and how much of a space will be a holy square? Will all residents be welcomed to the same standards?
I mean, that's a great question. I think it's a really tricky question. I think, the murder of George Floyd, I mean, we know for a long time there's been a history of issues with the relationship between police and our people of color communities, right? And I think that the murder of George Floyd really exacerbated that and highlighted all those issues, and really made us question, to what level of access do we want police to have in our city? And I know George Floyd Square, in particular, has and still has a really kind of unique relationship with the police department, and some want them, some don't. Public safety is extremely, extremely complex. But the reality is that some people in that area really do rely on public safety and rely on the police, and do call them because they need them. So we cannot exclude them from this space. I think it's more about how do we improve their relationship. How do we use other groups, from a violence de-escalation standpoint to help improve those relationships? I know we had a partnership with Agape to help them do some violence prevention work. So I think it's really about how do we redefine and continue to redefine for the area what public safety means. And I think that's going to be an ongoing conversation. But I think it's really, how do we work as a community to find an answer that works? And then how do we develop good relationships with our law enforcement and other public safety staff, so that way we can troubleshoot issues and mitigate problems that occur, rather than people being arrested or killed or murdered, or all these horrible things that have happened. But I think it's an ongoing effort, and I think the city is well aware of the risks and the problems. Amir Locke's murder or Amir Locke's death or whatever. There's a lot with all of these things. It just highlights the problems that exist, right? And I think Amir Locke recently really helped highlight that further. And I think it's an ongoing conversation.
Excuse me. Thank you, Alexander. I'm gonna kind of combine a couple here. We're at about 6:42, 15 to 20 minutes to go. We've got a significant number of comments here. I'm gonna do my best to kind of combine a few of these to get a few points across from folks. Will other people, such as Brianna Taylor and others, be incorporated in any way? And excuse me, will there be an opportunity for LGBTQ plus section near the George Floyd Memorial to support their rights?
I can take this one if that's okay.
Yeah, sure thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to realize that, this, if I'm getting the intent of that question correct, it sounds like it's speaking to a kind of a memorial or kind of a safe space. The real intent of this project is to organize space in a way that's reflective of how the street's been used for the last 2 years, and in a safe manner, and that really reflects our city policy and is in line with the direction we're getting from and influence and comments we're getting from community engagement. So to speak to the question specifically, it sounds like it's referring to a memorial. Again, that is a separate but coordinated process with this project.
Thank you, Trey. Give me one moment here. Alrighty, so I'm going to read, I'll just read the next one out here. The vast majority of residents in the immediate area support closing the streets to vehicle traffic. The city has shown a history of ignoring this input, such as when the poll was mailed out with 2 options involving opening the streets. because the city does not support keeping them closed, as it's stated in this comment. How are the concerns of these residents actually going to be addressed?
Can you repeat that one more time, Craig?
Just read it out as it's written. The vast majority of residents in the immediate area support closing the streets to vehicle traffic. The city has shown a history of ignoring that input, such as when the poll was mailed out with 2 options involving opening the streets because the city does not support keeping them closed, as they state. How are the concerns of these residents actually going to be addressed?
Yeah, so, that when the street was reopened, I think that was, a really tricky situation. And the response to reopen the street was because of public safety concerns that were at a really, I would say, at a boiling point. I would say based on the engagement I've done, I think a lot of people have a lot of different opinions. I've never in any way, shape, or form experienced any level of unanimous decisions or opinions on what that space should be or how it should function. And really, that was in regards to the interim design. With the work that Trey and I are doing, this is the first time the city has comprehensively engaged the community stakeholders around what the future of this intersection should be. We're outlining a year-long process to do that. We're attempting to provide a variety of means to engage with us and the project team. No decisions have been made. And I would say to the person that asked that question is like, please engage with us on this project and give us your opinions, come out to events, be present, share your voice, share your opinions. I think that's the best way to engage is what do you want the future of this space to be looking forward? And this is the City of Minneapolis's best attempt to do that. We are very open to feedback and how can we better attune this to meet your needs. But no concepts have been developed. No decisions have been made other than we're starting this project and process, and we want to engage with you, and that's why we're here today.
Thank you, Alexander. Good response. I'm going to give you one more similar, just to make sure you have an opportunity to make the point clear. And I think your follow-up or your answer there toward the tail end did that. It's been said that this is stage 1 of community engagement. It's hard to trust that when the city sent out a postcard last year. This is somewhat related to the previous one with limited options and didn't listen to many of the community members who asked for the intersection to stay closed. So how are you addressing the broken trust from that process and the early morning destruction of parts of the square during reopening last summer? It may be an opportunity for you to restate some of your previous comments, but I think we can address this one.
Yeah, I mean, that was tough. That was a really tough situation. Like I said, that decision to reopen the square was really based on the issues with public safety in the area. There was a lot of pressure to reopen it. There was a lot of gun violence in that space. I realized the manner in which that was done was not pleasant. It was very jarring for folks. And a lot of people didn't really get a real decision in that process. You were given a survey and chose, do you like the fist over here or do you like it over here? But with this project and this process, we are trying to be transparent. We understand that there's not a lot of trust, or there's different levels of trust in the community. I mean, this is the most complex thing the city of Minneapolis has ever embarked upon. I don't want to. The project and process we're laying out is around designing concepts, with community stakeholders. And I think as this process carries on, you will be able to judge and critique that process and assess if this process and project is meeting your desires and needs. And so, I would say for the project team, give us a little bit of time and see where we're at, and then you can really assess if you think we're meeting those needs. And I think the most immediate way is, giving us feedback on the design goals and the engagement goals, because that's really what we're going to use as the framework to conduct this work. And as this work continues, those are really the components that will be held to. Did this project support racial healing? Did this project provide space for community gathering? And those goals are really almost like in a sense, like a contract that you can hold the city accountable to. And so I would say give us feedback on the goals, and continue to be engaged and continue to be involved in the process.
Thanks. Give me one moment here to catch up to your spot. This is just a statement from an individual or comment. Please engage community associations to share updates on future meetings. That was understood. Here's a question for you, Mary. Will Public Works decide what art is acceptable and allowed in the square? Even though it's your CPAG? It's art question?
Greg, I crashed for a second there.
Oh yeah, I can repeat it for you there. This one is it's addressed to Public Works, but I believe it's an art question, so I'll allow you to respond. Will Public Works decide what art is acceptable and allowed in the square?
The Public Works will, and Public Works staff often have a role in thinking about the art at a specific location. We rely on Public Works staff to advise us on things like public safety and engineering, and Public Works controls the right of way, and so we will likely engage them in that process. The process for approving art in the city and the design of artwork in the city is that it goes to the Minneapolis Arts Commission. And so the Arts Commission will be involved. Also, there's a complicated process for engaging artists, contracting with artists, and getting approvals for different sizes of contracts. So things might also go to the city council and the mayor for approval.
Mary, can I piggyback on that one while I have you? This is related to the city planning on complete control then of the art. So can you maybe just expand on how, so it sounds as though when talking about the city commissioning artworks or art being approved by the Arts Commission, the city's planning on complete control, despite saying that it's paid, that it's led by a community-led process. That's the question or statement coming in. Any follow-up to that regarding process?
So as I said earlier, there's lots of different ways that art happens in the right of way and on public property. And it's very common for community groups to have artworks in the right of way and to have responsibility and control over those artworks, provided they meet the city's public safety standards. And I would anticipate that we are going to have community proposals for having art in this area. And we'll need to, as part of the engagement for this project, talk about with the community about the balance of art at the location, and at the locations in the whole place, and how much art there is, who's represented there. All of those will be part of this process.
Okay, thank you very much, Mary. Let's see here. So here's another one regarding not for you, Mary, necessarily, but another comment or question. Regarding the nearby pond that has been used as a representative cemetery, are there any efforts to maintain this land better so offerings, lit candles, and other items does not continue to collect, cause environmental harm, or pose a safety issue?
I can take this one, Craig. Yeah, just great question. I'd just like to highlight that over the course of 2 years, a lot of the installments in the area and a lot of the area in general has really been well maintained by some of the community and some of the activists in the space. While the pond kind of falls outside the right of way and outside the scope of this project, I think it's important to really recognize that we do have a design goal that is to identify community space for gathering. And so we realize that people do gather there, people gather in other places in the intersection. It's important to think about that as we're designing and working with community to design the street. Excuse me.
Thanks for that, Trey. I'm going to hit a couple more here. We are at 6:53 here now. It's my understanding, Trey and Alexander, that we will be adhering to roughly our 7 p.m. Meeting end time. If you have any other direction or guidance to me from there, let me know. Otherwise, I'll continue through with a few more. I'm not sure if you wanted to do any closing remarks, Trey or Alexander, or any others that are left on the call here. I think many have had to step away so far. Let me hit another one while you think about that. Trey, I'm gonna pass this one to you, I think. How are you weighing public input? If anyone can fill out the survey, it leads to possibility of, for example, wealthy homeowners not from the community to outweigh those that most directly impacted, who are most directly impacted, and those who have been in George Floyd Square on a daily, weekly basis. There's a deep need for equity in this engagement, not just fairness of voices.
Definitely. And I think that's a great question that I think really speaks to some of the things we heard through our listening sessions and also our engagement goals for this project. I'll just, preface what I'm about to say with, any survey that we do is not empirical, it's not scientific. We know that, if anyone who has a link can edit and put in a response, but we want to kind of balance that with other community engagement feedback throughout the project, whether it's our open houses, our virtual open houses like this, our project emails, or even phone calls that we receive from residents. And I think it's really important to consider that we're trying to really conduct an open and fair and a process that really is reflective of the engagement goals that we have, which are honoring BIPOC voices. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, that we in the past and historically with engagement with reconstruction projects and just projects in general that have an engagement component in the city, we typically hear from those populations that are overrepresented, and we don't hear a lot from our BIPOC our BIPOC populations. I'll just say that, and so it's really important that we're very intentional and targeted in getting to those audiences.
Thanks for that, Trey. Here's a question for you. Who is leading efforts on the team to create a proposed plan for closing the streets and creating a pedestrian boulevard or parkway?
I can answer that. We as a project team are going to explore a variety of design options. We know that a pedestrian plaza, pedestrian area is very popular. And so as we continue our work through this summer and get more design feedback and concepts, we'll be able to coalesce around design options and then planning to come back in the fall with design options. So the project team as a whole, whether that's engagement, whether that's design, is all involved in all of that work. And this summer, we're going to have more activities where we can start talking about design. If you notice, just in general with our engagement, we haven't talked that much about design because we wanted to introduce the project first. Even at the open house we went to on Saturday, some people came in, rightfully so, concerned. Even my mom was like, "Oh, where are the design concept at?" I was like, "Mom, we haven't done any design work yet. We're just introducing the project. That will come, but we're not at that point yet." And the reason we're not is because we knew if we started coming with design concepts, people would be very concerned. They would feel like they haven't been engaged. And so we wanted to level set and just really start conversations with folks about the project and really just the goals first. I think that's kind of what Trey alluded to with some of his responses. Craig, I say we take like a few more and then just conclude with just some closing remarks.
Agreed and understood. I'll try to get through a couple more. Here's one. Will transit users have a say in whether or not public transportation will run through 38th in Chicago?
Absolutely. I mean, we're going to explore concepts that include transit and that don't include transit. We understand it's a very, polarizing piece for some. We understand the D line was slated to go through this intersection, and they pulled those plans from the construction right now, and the D line is going to be on temporary rerouting around the intersection. So we absolutely understand that transit is a really big thing and really matters to a lot of folks. This will be assessing to what level of access transit does have. So yes, we will be exploring transit through this project. We'll be working with Metro Transit. You'll start seeing them more integrated into the work when we start talking about existing conditions and design as well.
Thank you for that response. I'll give you another one here. Give me one moment. The character of the intersection of 38th and Chicago and the surrounding communities is closely tied to the design and traffic patterns along all of 38th and all of Chicago, as well as major nearby roadways, such as Park and Portland. How does the city plan to re-envision those roadways or these related road segments as part of this project?
Yeah, that's a good question. Co-chair, were you gonna go?
Yeah, I can take it. Yeah, so I think the question is kind of speaking to our conceptual design process, as Alex kind of flashed a slide earlier in the presentation. Conceptual design includes community feedback, balancing that with city policy, and our technical analysis. And our technical analysis is a really critical component to coming out with existing conditions for this project, explaining how people move in the area, explaining how travel patterns work on our nearby traffic generators, whether it's our county facilities or other destinations in the space, and balancing that and communicating that and helping community learn along the way about how we measure that data and how we evaluate that data and how we use it to develop design concepts. So to speak to like how it's explicitly going to impact design as of right now, I think it's important to note, as Alex has mentioned many times before, that we're not digging into design details right now. Right now, we're talking about the guidance and direction of the project by getting feedback on our design goals and our engagement goals. But once we dip into existing conditions and we start talking about start moving on to the later portion of the year and discussing alternative concepts, that's when those components will really be explained to community and kind of taken into account.
The world's largest hockey stick.
Okay. The fun of Zoom. Here's another question, or of Teams. Here's another question. How and when will Metro Transit be involved with this project for the D-Line BRT station that was planned at the intersection? Will this agency restart station area planning after a design concept has been selected for the intersection, or are they actively involved now?
Yeah, so we've been engaged with Metro Transit for the last 2+ years. And we're going to start integrating them more into this process as we start getting into existing conditions and design, because we understand they're a really critical stakeholder. Transit is really important, and there was a lot of planning efforts done in advance to include transit. So they will be a part of this. They will be involved as we start working through designs. And yes, you'll start to see them more in the future.
All right, folks, we are just past the 7 o'clock hour here. Alexander and Trey, I'd like to pass it back to you for closing comments, and also maybe just to let folks know how we'll be summarizing this information, plus the other items that have not had an opportunity to go through the read aloud this evening.
Yeah, so we thank you so much for the comments. We hope we've been able to answer some of them. We realize there's still a ton of questions out there. Our contact info is in the presentation. There's a survey as well. You can call us or email us. We will analyze all the feedback from the physical open house and this virtual one, and we'll have a report back. We'll be spending May analyzing that information. And then into the summer and June and beyond, we'll start actually getting into some future events. So stay tuned. Please subscribe to the Gov Delivery. It is the most efficient way for us to communicate to you all. And we really thank you for the time. We understand this is a really complex project. There's a lot of different needs and desires. And we just thank you for taking the time with us. Trey, anything to add?
No, I think you nailed it. I appreciate everyone from coming here. I want to extend a thank yous to the project team as well. Looking forward to future engagement with the community on this project.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.